A true real-life story. He chose his mistress over his fated mate, then watched the dark alpha crown her queen of all kingdoms. She washed his coffee cup for the third time that week. Not because it was dirty. It was perfectly clean after the first wash. She just kept finding it in the sink again. Rinsed but not washed. Set down with that particular lazy half-effort she had learned to read like a second language over 2 years. He would rinse it. He would set it down. He would not finish the job. And she would finish it for him, because that was the shape their life had taken, and she had let it take that shape without quite noticing when it happened. Her name was Rhea. She was 26. She had moved to Silver Peak 3 years ago for a research position she didn't end up taking, and she had stayed because of Dhruv, and she had stayed after Dhruv because she couldn't figure out where else to go with all the small pieces of a life she had slowly, quietly built here. She finished washing the cup. She dried it. She put it back on the shelf, handle facing left, the way she always put it. She didn't cry. That's the thing about certain kinds of grief. They don't feel like grief at first. They feel like a to-do list. They feel like muscle memory. They feel like washing a cup that is already clean. She had met Dhruv at a council meeting 14 months after arriving in Silver Peak. He was the alpha of the central pack. Not the largest, not the most powerful, but stable, respected, the kind of alpha who was good at making rooms feel settled. He had that quality. Rooms reorganized themselves around him into something calmer. She had noticed it immediately, that first meeting, and she had mistaken it for strength. It wasn't strength. She understood that now. It was management. There is a difference. They had been fated mates. The bond recognized between them on that first evening, clean and unmistakable, the way those things always are in their world. She had felt it, he had felt it. They had looked at each other across a conference table littered with territorial maps and teacups, and something had settled into place with a soft final sound, like a key in a lock. 14 months after that, he told her he was choosing someone else. He told her on a Tuesday. That detail stayed with her, the sheer Tuesdayness of it. He sat across from her at their kitchen table, the one she had picked out at a market 2 towns over, and he talked for a long time. He used words like complicated and timing, and it isn't about what I feel. He used the phrase, I have to be honest with you, 3 times. The third time, she counted the tiles on the kitchen floor. There were 42. She was certain there were 42. She counted again later and got 44. She never figured out where the 2 extra tiles came from. The woman he had chosen was called Priya. She worked in diplomatic relations for the Southern Council. She was precise and poised and had a way of making everything she said sound like a conclusion that had already been agreed upon. She wasn't unkind. That was the strange thing. Rhea had tried very hard to find a reason to hate her, and kept arriving at the same disappointing answer. There wasn't one. Dhruv said all the things people say when they are doing something wrong but have found a way to narrate it to themselves as reasonable. He said it gently. He said it with his eyes on the table more than on her face. He said, I think you deserve better than someone who is uncertain, as though uncertainty was the problem, as though the fact that he was choosing to be certain about someone else was a gift he was giving her. She said, sure, absolutely. She didn't mean any of it. He left an hour later. She sat at the table. She thought about the chip in the paint on his front door. A small chip, low down near the hinge, which she had meant to mention 100 times and somehow never had. She wondered if Priya would notice it. She wondered if Priya would mention it. She wondered if it would get fixed. She thought about that chip for 3 blocks, walking to her car in the cold. She thought about it for a long time after that. The next several weeks passed, the way certain kinds of weeks do, mostly invisible. She went to work. She came home. She reorganized her spice rack. She reorganized it again. By the end of the 3rd week, she owned 4 kinds of paprika, smoked, sweet, hot, and one labeled simply paprika, as though it had given up trying to be specific. And she had not cooked a single thing that required any of them. She was not broken. She was specific about this with herself. In the careful, internal way she was specific about most things. She was not broken. She was doing that thing people do when they have been chosen against, not abandoned, which is a more precise wound and one that takes longer to locate properly in the body. Being abandoned means someone left. Being chosen against means someone looked at you and at something else and picked the something else. It's a different kind of math. It lands differently. She ate toast. She drank too much tea. She reorganized the paprika. The Alpha Council convened 6 weeks after Drew's conversation with her. She had to go. She was a registered liaison between the Silver Peak Research Division and the Interpack Governance Committee, which was a title that had sounded important when she accepted it, and now felt mostly like an obligation to sit in uncomfortable chairs and listen to alphas negotiate the same territorial disagreements in slightly different language every 3 months. She wore the Navy suit, the one that said, "I am fine and also professionally credible," without requiring her to feel either of those things. She drove to the hall. She parked. She sat in her car for 4 minutes, doing the mental version of rolling up her sleeves. He would be there. He would be there with Priya. Priya would be wearing something in a color that was perfectly chosen. She would be standing exactly the right distance from Dhruv, close enough to signal, far enough to remain elegant. She would say the right things to the right people. She would do everything correctly, because she always did. Riya got out of the car. She had 4 kinds of paprika at home, and none of it was going to help her here. The hall was full in that particular way. Formal rooms get full, not chaotic, but layered, every group occupying its territory as precisely as they argued over the land versions of it. She found her seat. She set her portfolio on the table. She arranged her pens. She saw him almost immediately, Dhruv, across the room, standing with a cluster of Central Pack representatives. Priya was beside him. The something she was wearing was the color of a healed wound, or maybe the color right before a wound closes. Riya couldn't quite decide which. It was a beautiful color. She hated it precisely as much as it deserved. She looked back at her pens. She counted them. 7 pens. She never needed 7 pens. She brought them anyway. She always brought too many pens to things, because at some point in her life she had developed an irrational fear of running out of pens in situations where she needed to write things, which was the kind of low-grade anxiety that sounds ridiculous out loud but feels entirely serious in the body. 7 pens. She uncapped one. She put it back. She was fine. She noticed him when the room changed. That is the only way she could describe it later, to herself, alone, at midnight, staring at the ceiling. The room changed, not loudly, not dramatically. The way pressure changes before a storm, not visible, not audible, just suddenly the air is a different thing than it was a moment ago. The Dark Alpha of the Eastern Territories had arrived. She had heard of Kale the way you hear about weather systems that exist in regions you don't live in. A name in reports, a signature on interpack agreements. 17 Eastern Territories under one governance structure, the largest unified alpha domain on record, held together not by force, but by something more durable than force, which nobody had quite managed to name precisely in any document she had read. He arrived late, the way people arrive late when time is a resource they have already decided to allocate differently than other people do. She didn't look at him immediately. She had good instincts, generally, about when not to look at things. She lasted approximately 40 seconds. He was standing near the eastern entrance, speaking to no one, reading the room the way someone reads a document they wrote themselves, not looking for information, just checking that it is still accurate. Dark coat. Still. The particular stillness of things that are not fighting to be still. He wasn't looking at her. She looked away first. The session opened. Territorial reports, seasonal migration agreements. The usual furniture of their world moved around the same rooms in different configurations. Dhruv spoke twice. He spoke well. He always spoke well. That was never the issue with Dhruv. His voice had that quality of sounding like a reasonable conclusion even when it wasn't one. Riya took notes. She wrote things down that she already knew. It gave her hands something to do. Priya didn't speak during the session. She didn't need to. She had a particular way of being present in rooms that communicated everything she intended without requiring words. A tilt of the head, a subtle adjustment of expression, an economy of approval or disapproval delivered through micro-shifts that Rhea had spent too many hours of her life trying to decode and had ultimately decided were simply the tool of someone who had learned, very early, that silence makes rooms nervous, and nervousness makes people useful. She was good at it. Rhea gave her that. The session broke for 30 minutes mid-morning. The break was when it happened. Rhea was standing near the side table with tea she wasn't drinking, watching the room refill with conversations, when she heard Drew's voice shift into a register she recognized. The diplomatic gentle register, the one that sounded like consideration but was shaped like a verdict. She didn't mean to hear it. The room had that particular acoustic quality of old formal buildings, where sound bounced off marble and arrived at you from unexpected directions. He was speaking to a cluster that included 2 members of the Northern Pack Council and a woman from the Western Territories Rhea vaguely recognized. He was speaking about the Silver Peak Research Division. He was speaking about the consortium proposal, the one she had spent 4 months drafting. He was describing it as a preliminary gesture, and not yet ready for serious consideration, and well-intentioned, but perhaps lacking the broader contextual understanding these decisions require. Well-intentioned, she held her teacup with both hands. She did not look across the room to where she knew, without looking, that Kale was standing. The 2 Northern Pack members were nodding. They were going to take this away with them. They were going to talk about the consortium proposal in the language Drew had just handed them, and it would travel, and it would settle, and 4 months of her work would become well-intentioned. She was going to say nothing. She had already decided this, in the half-second between hearing and processing. She was going to say nothing because the room was full of the wrong people having conversations that required more calculation than confrontation, and she was good at calculation. She had always been better at it than she liked to admit, and the calculation was, not now, not here. Then someone spoke from her left. The Silver Peak Consortium draft, said a voice that was neither loud nor careful, was reviewed by the Eastern Governance Committee last month. We recommended it for priority consideration. She turned. Kale was 2 feet away, holding a glass of water, looking at Drew with the patient attention of someone reading a notice they find mildly interesting. The room performed a small shift. Drew's face did something she couldn't quite categorize. It landed somewhere between recalculation and maintenance of expression. Of course, Drew said. I only meant that. The preliminary findings alone represent a 6-pack efficiency gain, Kale said. Not a gesture, a platform. He didn't look at her. He moved on to speak with someone else. The conversation around Drew reorganized itself. The 2 Northern Pack members were nodding differently now, toward the idea rather than away from it. Priya said something quiet and perfectly timed. The moment closed. Rhea put down her teacup before she dropped it. Something moved through her, hot and quick and familiar, sweet the way anger is sweet when it is the thing that steadies you. Not at Kale, at herself, for the way her hands had stopped shaking the moment he spoke, for the way steadied felt, right now, like a problem. She picked up her teacup again. She drank from it. It was cold. That was fine. Everything was fine. More like he had calculated a trajectory and arrived at the same coordinate she was occupying. She was in the corridor outside the main hall, reviewing her notes against the morning session, her back to the window. He stopped a reasonable distance away. Not close, not far, calibrated. The Eastern Territories received your draft in March, he said, without preamble. No hello, no, I hope the session is going well, no performance of small talk. My policy team flagged it as the most comprehensive cross-pack coordination framework they had seen in 4 years. That's good to know, she said. You said that like it isn't. I said it exactly like it is, she said. It's good to know. Thank you. He looked at her, not with the soft, searching look of someone deciding how to approach her, with the direct, steady look of someone who has already decided what they see and is simply confirming it. You spent 4 months on that document, he said. I'm aware. And you were going to let it stand as well-intentioned. I was going to let the room be the room, she said, and find a different moment. The different moment was this morning. She looked at him. He had a quality she kept running into without wanting to, the quality of someone who does not dress their observations in comfort before delivering them. It should have felt blunt. It didn't. It felt like being accurately read by someone who was not trying to impress her with the reading. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "Because the document is good," he said, "and because the people in that room were being asked to think of it as something it isn't." "That happens," she said. "Yes," he said. He didn't follow it with anything. She waited for the follow-up, the offer to help, the positioning, the thing people do when they want you to feel indebted. It didn't come. He looked like he was simply finished with that portion of the conversation and was waiting to see what she did with it. It was, somehow, the most unsettling thing he had done so far. "Thank you," she said again, meaning it more than the first time. He nodded once. He left. She looked at her notes. The words had not changed. Somehow the page felt different. The afternoon session was long. She was seated 3 rows from the front, which put Dhruv and the Central PAC delegation in her peripheral vision whether she wanted them there or not. She kept her eyes on the speakers. She took notes. She ate a mint from the small tin she kept in her bag because her hands needed something to do, and mints were more acceptable than bringing a stress ball to the Alpha Council. The Eastern Territories bloc, Kale's delegation, sat to the left of her section. She was aware of this in the specific way you are aware of things you are trying not to be aware of, which is to say, completely and without interruption. He sat still. That was the thing that kept pulling at her attention. Not because stillness was unusual in a council room, but because his stillness was a different kind. Not the stillness of someone holding themselves quiet, but the stillness of someone who had simply decided the current moment required presence, and was present in it, fully, without the low-grade performance of patience that most people substituted for the real thing. She ate another mint. The rupture came on the second day. She had known it was coming in the way you can feel a weather system without seeing it. A pressure shift, a quality of silence that is too deliberate to be casual. The second day's session opened with territorial adjustment proposals, borderline agreements that required consensus votes from all present alpha-level representatives. Standard. She had sat through this process 4 times before. It moved slowly, with the particular self-important slowness of processes that knew they were important and scheduled themselves accordingly. Dhruv put forward a motion. The motion proposed restructuring the Interpac liaison framework, the committee she sat on, to better reflect current alpha leadership alignment, which was the language of reorganization and which meant, if you understood how these motions worked, the removal of any liaison who did not hold a direct PAC affiliation. She held no direct PAC affiliation. She was an independent registered liaison, had been for 3 years. It was not an uncommon structure. Several research and diplomatic positions operated the same way. The framework existed precisely to include people like her. He was proposing to dismantle the framework. He was doing it gently. He always did things gently. That was, she was realizing, one of the most precise forms of thoroughness she had ever encountered. He was doing it in procedural language, with neutral expression, as though this was simply a logistical refinement and not the removal of her standing from a room she had spent 3 years earning her way into. She looked at her hands on the table. She did not look at Priya. She thought for a moment about the paprika, all 4 kinds of it, sitting on her shelf at home, waiting for something that had not been cooked. Then Kale spoke. Moon. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't wait to be recognized. He simply spoke, and the room, with the particular awareness rooms develop for voices that carry weight, went quiet. The independent liaison structure, he said, currently supports 11 active cross-PAC research partnerships. 3 of those partnerships are in the Eastern Territories. 2 are in the Northern Bloc. 1 is a joint Southern-Western initiative that is currently in final approval stages. He paused. Not for effect, to let the numbers exist in the room. Removing independent standing removes the framework that makes those partnerships legally coherent. The motion as written doesn't restructure the committee, it dissolves it. Dhruv's expression did not change. Priya's did not either. That would require a supermajority to pass, said one of the Northern PAC elders, looking at the motion document. It would, Kale said. Silence. The kind of silence that does the voting for you. The motion was tabled, not defeated, tabled, which was a political courtesy that meant it would not come back in this session. Whether it came back at all depended on what happened in the next 24 hours, and everyone in the room understood this. She breathed. She had not noticed she had stopped. He caught up with her in the parking structure that evening. She heard his footsteps, steady, unhurried, and knew whose they were without turning around. She had apparently learned the sound of him in 2 days, which she filed under problems she would examine later. "You knew he was going to do that," Cale said. "Not a question. I had a feeling," she said. And she turned. He was standing in the yellow-gray light of the concrete structure, hands in his coat pockets, looking at her with that same direct attention. "And I had already drafted a counter-proposal," she said. 3 different versions. I was going to submit them through the Northern Pack liaison before the next session. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. The thing that is adjacent to surprise when someone does the thing you thought they would do and you find you are still somehow pleased they did it. "You didn't want to use them today," he said. "I didn't need to," she said. "You already handled today." They looked at each other. "I want to propose something," he said. "You propose things very efficiently," she said. "The Eastern Territories are formalizing an independent research coalition, separate from the council structure. It would give independent liaisons a formal home, a registered standing that doesn't depend on the Inter-Pack Committee framework." She was quiet. "You'd be the founding coordinator," he said. "That's not a small thing to offer someone you've known for 2 days. "I've known your work for 4 months, he said. "The 2 days are almost irrelevant." She looked at the parking structure ceiling. Concrete, pipes, the particular ugliness of practical things. "Why?" she asked. "Because the research is good," he said, "and because the people in these rooms keep treating good work like a gesture." She did not say yes that night. She said she would think about it. She drove home and sat in her car in her own parking space for 7 minutes and thought about it, and already knew the answer, but the 7 minutes felt important, like a formality her own process required before she was allowed to move forward. The last day of the council session opened with an announcement. Dhruv and the Central Pack delegation had a statement to read. Priya stood beside him, in something the color of early morning. It was a precise color choice. Rhea noticed it the way you notice things you have been trained to notice, and then she looked back at the front table. The statement was about the Mistress, not in so many words, in the precise constructed language of formal councils, which translates certain human disasters into administrative events. Priya was being formally presented as the Central Pack Alpha's chosen partner. The announcement was structured as a stability declaration, a commitment to the Pack's continuity and governance. It was all very reasonable. It was all very Dhruv. She looked at her notes. She did not have notes from this moment. She clicked her pen. She did not cry. This was again important. What she felt was something more like the moment you realize you have been carrying a weight that wasn't yours to carry, and someone has finally taken it from you. Except no one had taken it. It had simply become, in this moment, clearly visible, the shape of it, what she had been holding. She set her pen down. The formal recognition happened in the afternoon. It was not planned. Or if it was planned, she had not been told about the planning. Cale's delegation called a point of order in the final session, a procedural move that paused the current agenda and required the floor. He stood. The room that had learned, over 3 days, to reorganize itself around him, did so. He named the Eastern Research Coalition. He named its structure, its purpose, its founding members. He named the registered framework for independent standing it would provide. And then he named her, Rhea, Silver Peak Division, as founding coordinator and full Eastern Council liaison, with all the standing and voting rights that came with the position. She had not been told he was going to do it here, in front of everyone, in this room. She was absolutely certain she was not going to cry. She was, in this moment, correct. What she did instead, she sat very still. She looked at the table in front of her. She thought about 42 tiles, or 44 tiles, and the chip in the door paint she had never mentioned, and 4 kinds of paprika, and 7 pens she never used, and all the small, quiet ways she had organized her grief over the last 6 weeks into things that did not look like grief. She thought about the coffee cup she had washed 3 times. The room was speaking. People were speaking. There was formal acknowledgement from the floor, the procedural language of recognition, the Northern Pack elder saying something that sounded like approval. She looked up. Kale was looking at her. Not dramatically, not with the loaded significance of a moment that knows it is a moment. With the same steady, direct, accurate attention she had been finding impossible to get used to. She nodded. He nodded. The session continued. She looked for Dhruv once, in the aftermath. After the session formally closed, in the shuffled noise of a room becoming a collection of separate conversations. She found him without looking. Peripheral vision had always been something she was good at. He was across the room. He was watching. His expression was the expression of a man who has made a decision he was certain about and is now standing in the consequence of it, and finding the consequence looks different from the decision side than the outcome side. She knew this expression. She had sat across a kitchen table from it. She looked at him for exactly as long as it took to feel absolutely nothing except something like setting a very heavy bag down on a floor and walking away from it. She walked away from it. Outside, in the cold air of the parking lot, she called her sister. Her sister was 23 and studying urban planning in another city, and had the particular quality of people who had grown up watching someone be careful and thoughtful their whole life, and had therefore made peace with being unceremoniously direct. "How was it?" her sister asked. "Long," Ria said. "The ex?" "There. And nothing," Ria said. "It was fine." A pause. "Ria, I got offered a new position," she said. "A good one. A real one." Another pause. "Who offered it?" She thought about the parking structure, the yellow-gray light, the steady sound of footsteps she had learned in 2 days. "Someone who read my work before he met me," she said. Her sister was quiet for a moment. Then, "Okay, that's the most specific thing you've said about a person in 3 years." "Don't," Ria said. "I'm just noting it." "Note it quietly." "Noted," her sister said, quietly, while absolutely filing it away forever. Ria got into her car. She sat for a moment. The parking lot was emptying around her, headlights moving through the dark in the slow, purposeful way of things ending and things beginning at the same time. She drove home. She did not reorganize the paprika. She cooked something actual. She didn't know what she was making until she was halfway through it, but it turned out to be the dish her grandmother used to make on Sundays, a slow, careful thing that took longer than most people bothered with and smelled like being 12 years old and certain the world was manageable. She ate it. She washed the pot. She did not wash it 3 times. 3 weeks later, Kale sent her the first formal briefing document for the Eastern Research Coalition. It was thorough, which she had expected. It was also, and this surprised her, though she filed the surprise in the same cabinet as the parking structure and the footsteps she had learned too fast, laced through with dry, quiet humor, small notations in the margins, one footnote that said simply, "Paprika." She stared at the footnote for a long time. She read the rest of the document. Then she opened a new reply and wrote, "The paprika section could use clarification. I have 4 kinds and none of them are addressed in the current framework." His reply came 17 minutes later. "Noted. Will revise. Which paprika do you recommend for inter-pack diplomacy?" She laughed. She had not laughed in a specific way in 6 weeks. That particular laugh, the one that comes from the ribs rather than the throat, the one that means you were surprised by something and the surprise was good. She wrote back, "The one labeled simply paprika. It has given up trying to be everything and is therefore the most reliable." His reply took 4 minutes. "I understand that completely." She did not have a single answer for what came next. This was new. For 2 years she had known exactly what came next. The shape of every day organized around the predictable geography of someone else's presence. Coffee cup. Rinse and set down. Her washing it again. The comfortable, deadening structure of a life built to accommodate someone who was not, she now understood, ever going to fully arrive. Now the shape was open, unresolved. The forward edge of it was uncertain in a way that could have been frightening and was, instead, the closest thing she had felt to possibility in longer than she had a specific date for. She accepted the position formally on a Thursday. She sent the signed documents through the Interpack system. She did not overthink the email. She wrote, "Signed and returned. Looking forward to the work." 3 seconds after she sent it, she wondered if looking forward was too much. She decided it wasn't. She was looking forward. That was accurate. That was simply the true thing, and she had spent enough of the last 6 weeks being careful with true things that she had run out of appetite for it. Looking forward as well. The work is the easy part. She read it twice. She knew what the second part meant. Or she had a feeling about what it meant. The same kind of feeling she'd had about the council motion. A pressure shift. Something changed in the air. Nothing you could point to directly, but nothing you could honestly say you hadn't noticed. She did not respond to the second part. She responded to the first. "Glad to hear the work is manageable. I'll send preliminary notes on the consortium integration by end of week." She sent it. She made coffee. She washed her own cup. Once, because once was how many times it needed to be washed, and put it back on the shelf with the handle facing left, and stood in her kitchen in the early morning with the light coming through the window at the particular angle that only happens in October, and felt the strange, specific, quietly extraordinary feeling of being exactly where she was. Not where she had been, not where she was trying to get to. Here, this kitchen, this light, this one cup, clean, handle left, the paprika on the shelf, all 4 kinds, caught the morning light and threw small shadows across the counter. She left them there. She had, she thought, things to cook,